Okay, so last time we talked about this module right here, which helped us handle the UI UX. And now we're going to talk about this guy right here, profile path reset. And this is the JavaScript that handles the Ajax functionality, which actually does the resetting of the password. So let's look at that. All right, so this is basically under source.js modules and the profile data and profile password reset. And as you can see, this also follows the same naming convention, all uppercase and exactly as the file name. And here I'm importing jQuery and jQuery validation using npm. I'm just importing them and I install them using npm install. But this line though, this you have to add manually, because when you install this library, this additional methods automatically comes with it. And that helps you further with the jQuery validation process. And here in the constructor, this is a very important variable, which is a localized variable for WordPress, which is a global variable. And let me show you where I'm getting this from. Okay, so this is what my functions file look like. Instead of dumping all my functions in this file, what I do, I organize them in folders. And here, to find out about the global variable and localization, we have to focus on this script right here. So let's go find it. Underscore functions and script setup right here. Okay, so this is where I set up all my scripts, JavaScript, my stylings with Sass and everything. So if you look at specifically this line, this is where I set up my JavaScript, the central file that has all the modules in it. That's where this gulp process is compiling and minifying that file and dumping it in this location, and I am on-queuing it. But while I'm doing so, I'm also enabling this block right here, WP localized script. This is where I am declaring some of the necessary global variables like root URL for the site, the Ajax URL, which brings me the admin URL that I need for Ajax, and the nonce. Let's not talk about all that. Let's focus on this one right here, Ajax URL, and let's go back to the JavaScript. So that's where this self-list data.ajax URL is coming from. That being said, here I'm declaring the PHP function name, which Ajax will call. And here I'm collecting the necessary elements that I need, which is the password reset form, this form right here, and the pass confirm input, the second one, this guy right here. Because the logic is, when user is inputting the password first here and confirming it here, so this will only allow you to hit update when these two matches, right? So I'm collecting this input, that knowing that this is the one the user wants. For that reason, I'm collecting this input right here, and here comes the validation function that lets us do this. So as soon as I type, this message shows up. As soon as I type here, and if it doesn't match the upper one, this message shows up. All this validation happens to this function. And I'm calling it inside the constructor, so as soon as this script gets loaded, this function gets automatically launched. Thus, this jQuery validation stuff gets invoked immediately. So this is where I'm using that pass reset form. I'm calling that form.validate, and this .validate function is coming from jQuery validation. And this, what this does is, this one enables the form to be responsive on key up. Like as soon as I hit keys, and it starts to react, right? And that happens because of this function. And other than that, and one thing to remember, that these rules only get applied if you use that in the name, not ID. For example, if I go here, ID as lister password and name as lister password. The next one, I have lister confirm password as a name and ID. So if you use the ID, validation is not going to work. You have to use the name. So these guys are the name of that input form, the form input, I'm sorry. And this is where I'm saying lister password has to be required by setting required true, minimum length 8. Same here, but this one is extra for this lister confirm password because this has to depend on this. Whatever is inserted on the first one has to match in the second one. Whatever is being used on the first one has to be used on the second one to confirm. Only this time, in this equal to attribute, you have to use the ID. This is not the name, this is the ID of this field. And once those are confirmed, there is a submit handler, and initially I'm using an event prevent default so that submit doesn't reload the site because that's its default behavior before it runs this function right here. So we're blocking it to reload the page using preventing default, and then we're calling this function update password Ajax, and that's where our main function comes in to play. In this function, I'm collecting the new password from that confirm input, the second input, and then I'm using this .ajax URL, which we got from here and which we got from here, right? The admin Ajax, and we type as post and data. Whenever we're using an Ajax function, inside the data, we have to call that function right here, this .ajax function, which we mentioned here. And as a data variable, I'm passing the new password. Normally, it should be new password colon new password, but since this is ES6, we can mention it once, and that works. And also, you have to notice all these functions are not regular functions. They are arrow functions, which comes from ES6 also. And because of that, we can use this keyword. Just because these functions are arrow functions, all reference this class. So now we are sending it all the information to this function right here. Now let's look at what's happening in this Ajax function. And this function also located here under underscore functions, and this is handling Ajax, so under Ajax folder. Let's look at in detail. I'm adding this action. WP Ajax is a prefix to this function name. Everywhere you see this function name same. The one above has this no priv attached to it, but if I enable it, what's going to happen is you can use this function without logging in. We don't want that. We want only logged in users to be able to access and use this function to reset password, right? So I disabled that. And once this function begins, we collect that new password, which we mentioned here under our data. So we collect this with post, and immediately we are sanitizing it because it's coming from users, so we have to make sure we insert clean data into our database. And at this point, we use a function called getCurrentUserID to get the user ID, because to reset password, all we need is the current user ID and the password text. This is our main function, WP reset password. So we're using this variable after sanitizing it and using the current user ID from this function. Once this is done, I'm just creating this array and sending it as a JSON object back to my JavaScript right here. And once this is received, and console logging it so that I can see the console that it was successful. And this is where I am alerting the user with a successful message. For example, here, let's say if we put a new password, a match, and once I hit, this is where it's coming from. Password updated, update successful, and this is that message. And once this message is received, and if the user clicks OK, we immediately reload the page, which logs you out. Boom, and we're back into the login screen. And that's all it takes to create this little block right here, which resets the password for any given user using ES6 JavaScript, Ajax, and PHP function. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please smash the like button and the subscribe button. This will help me bring more free contents like this to you every week. Thanks again.